For today's history video, I'd like to tell the story of 1933 when Roosevelt took office and when the banks were closed throughout the United States. It was a moment that was almost without parallel in American history. It was probably the single most important domestic achievement by any political administration throughout our entire history. Not, of course, counting the Civil War and slavery, but for executive action by the government, it absolutely was unique. What happened was that the stock market crashed in 1929. And 1930-31, there was a depression. Lots of people got unemployed. The effects rippled throughout the economy. But the banking system was not really affected. Then in late 1932 and early 1933, people began to really worry that their banks were going to close. And those were the days before federal deposit insurance. So they all ran to the bank, clutching their bank books, trying to get their money out. Among the people sent to the bank was my mother, who at the time was 16 years old, and was sent by her mother to the bank to try to get their money out. Everybody waited online. The bank closed its doors in their face. So Hoover, when he was in his last days as president, appealed to Roosevelt for joint action to reopen the banks. And Roosevelt was having none of it. He said, nope, this is your crisis. You made it. You have the power to solve it. You go ahead and solve it. And Hoover was very frustrated, but there was no solution. Then when Roosevelt took office, as every bank in the country was shuttering, as millions of people were lining up trying to get their money out of the bank and living cashless lives, even if they had money, they couldn't access it. Roosevelt announced that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, the major line in his inaugural address. Nameless panic that turns needed efforts for relief and ruins them. And it was a major statement by him. And he immediately got together all of his Treasury people and all of Hoover's old Treasury people. And they sat in a room for 48 hours and worked on solutions to the problem. Then Roosevelt issued an executive order closing every bank in the country. Some were still open, most were closed, but this closed all of them. And he had the ingenuity to call it a bank holiday, not a moratorium, but a holiday with a festive note to it. And for 4 days, nobody could get their money out of the bank. And he went on the air with radio, the first time he had, with a fireside chat, the first one of his presidency, where he explained to people what the banking system was. And he said, your bank doesn't keep all of your money in a vault at all times. It lends that money out to build homes and create jobs and help the economy operate. And when you need the money, it keeps enough of your money there, so it'll always be there for you to withdraw as you need it. But if everybody comes at once to pull their money out, the strongest bank can't survive. And as a result, these banks are closing. So what I'm going to do is close all the banks and then examine them. And as I find them to be fiscally sound, I'm going to reopen them starting on Monday. The address was on a Sunday. And if by Wednesday or Thursday the bank is not sound enough to reopen, I'm going to help subsidize it with federal aid so that it can be reopened and that can be sound, and you can be assured that your money is safe. And the fireside chat had such an effect in relieving people's anxiety, in explaining the situation. It was unparalleled in our history. And when the banks reopened 4 days later, there were lines outside the banks as always, but not to pull their money out, but to put the money they'd pulled out back in. And billions of gold and other currency, gold was acceptable then as currency, was redeposited in the banks, and the situation was solved by strong and aggressive executive action. Not just executive action, Congress passed legislation ratifying the bank holiday and setting up the procedure for reopening it. And it passed the bill in about 3 hours, both houses and on the president's desk. The government was absolutely incredible as it worked in that. And that really gave FDR his reputation. The balance of the New Deal was not quite as successful, although many parts of it were wonderful. But that action in the banking crisis was truly unique in our history. By the way, if you'd like more stories and anecdotes from more recent American history, get my book, 50 Shades of Politics. It's available only online from Amazon and dickmorris.com. But online you can order a paperback and you get it about 3 days after you order it. And I tell the story of how Trent Lott and Bill Clinton and I and Newt Gingrich, the four of us, worked together for the first time, last time in a long time. Nobody's worked together since, across party lines, to reform welfare, to balance the budget for 4 years, to raise the minimum wage, and to make health insurance portable from job to job. And there's a cute story I tell in the book. It's a collection of anecdotes. At the Gridiron Dinner, which was the one where politicians roast each other, Trent and I cooked up a skit. Trent Lott, the majority leader of the Republican, was giving his speech, and Bill Clinton was sitting right next to him on the podium. And Trent began his speech saying, we need to raise taxes, we need more government spending, we need to expand the federal government. And I stood up in my seat and I called Trent on his cell phone. And he answered it on the podium. And he said, not now, Dick, I'm giving a speech. And I said, yeah, Trent, you're giving the wrong speech. You're giving the speech I wrote for Clinton, not the one I wrote for you. And he said, oh my God. And he put the speech down, reached into his pocket, pulled out his speech, and went over and handed the other speech to Bill Clinton. And the audience laughed like hell. But that's how Washington's supposed to work. So get a copy of 50 Shades of Politics. You'll really enjoy it. Thanks for watching.